Hello kids, this is Mr. Whistler with your video lesson of the day. And today we are going to talk about how the Civil War started. Alright, now the election of 1860, the issues were slavery and would the Union break up. Now, during this election, the Democratic Party split. You had the Northern Democrats, you had the Southern Democrats, and you had the Constitutional Union Party, where another ex-Democrat was running. So for the Northern Democrats, you had Stephen A. Douglas, and thought that slavery could be solved with popular sovereignty. For the even though the Democratic Party was a Southern party, everyone in the South hated Stephen A. Douglas. He was a Northern Democrat, and he was really against slavery. So they went and got their own candidate, which was John C. Breckinridge, and his stand on slavery was to keep it or uphold it. Now, the Constitutional Union Party nominated John Bell, and he's kind of an interesting character because he was actually a plantation owner, and he was one of the few plantation owners that didn't think slavery should be spread. Now, he had been working in government in various positions for many years, and his campaign took a neutral stance on slavery, and they basically wanted to preserve the Union. Now, the Republicans had one candidate, and that was Abraham Lincoln, and he thought slavery should be left alone where it existed, but that it should not be spread anywhere else. And Lincoln was so hated in the South that he didn't even appear on many of the Southern ballots. Southerners thought a Republican victory in this election would cause slave riots and revolts. And the voting in this election was very, very sectional, meaning one section of the country, the North, voted one way, and the other section, the South, voted a different way. So here's the election map, and you can see that basically the whole North voted Republican, voted for Lincoln, and basically the whole South voted for the Southern Democratic candidate, Breckinridge. Stephen A. Douglas took Missouri and part of New Jersey, and Bell took his home state of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. So Lincoln ended up winning the election 180 to 72 to 39 to 12. Now the South did not trust the Republicans. They did not think that the Republicans would protect Southern rights. So 1 month later, on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Well, leaders in Washington tried to save the country by proposing a compromise, which basically said they would protect slavery below the 3630 line. But this was completely unacceptable to the Republicans. Lincoln came out with this statement. He said, "The government shall be broken up unless we surrender to those we have beaten." So the Republicans didn't want to compromise. The South also rejected the plan. They said, "We spit upon every plan to compromise. No human power can save the Union." So the Southerners were done. They wanted to split, and there was really nothing that anybody could do to change their mind. All right. By February, 3 months later, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas had all joined South Carolina and decided to secede from the Union. Now, these 7 states got delegates together and formed a new government, and they called their new government the Confederate States of America. They elected Jefferson Davis as their president, and he was, before the country split, a senator from Mississippi. Now, Southerners justified their decision to secede with the theory of states' rights. Now, we've been learning about states' rights all year, and our first definition of states' rights was that the South thought they were the state governments thought they were more powerful than the federal government. And the second definition that we focused on was that the states thought they had the power to nullify laws that they thought were unconstitutional or that they didn't like. So here's the Southern justification. The states said that they voluntarily entered the Union and that they looked at the Constitution as a contract among the individual states and the federal government. They thought that the federal government violated the contract in 2 ways. One, they refused to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act, and 2, they denied the South equal rights in the territories. So in the South's mind, they were justified in leaving the Union. So reactions to secession, many Southerners welcomed it, some were alarmed. Robert E. Lee, the eventual head general of the South, said, "I see only that a fearful calamity is upon us." Presidential responses. President Buchanan's term still had a couple of months left, and he said the South had no right to secede, but he had no power to stop it. Everyone wondered what Lincoln would say once he took office. They also wondered what the slave states that had not left would do. So the slave states of Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, and Arkansas chose to stay in the Union for now. So there were 6 slave states that didn't secede right away. Now, if the United States used force against the Confederacy, then these remaining slave states might also secede. So it was kind of a delicate situation. Lincoln, once he took office, vowed to hold federal property in the South, and he also pleaded with the South for reconciliation. "We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." So Lincoln reached out to them, but they weren't listening. So they tested Lincoln's vow, and Confederate forces seized or took some U.S. forts in the South. Lincoln did not want to start the war. He didn't want to shoot first by trying to take these forts back. But he also knew that not doing anything would amount to admitting the Southerners' right to secede. So he was in a tough situation, and he really wasn't sure what to do. Well, Fort Sumter, an island fort guarding Charleston Harbor off the coast of South Carolina, ran out of supplies, and about this time the Confederates went knocking at their door asking them to give up the fort. Well, the commander of the fort sent a word to Lincoln about the situation, and Lincoln sent a letter to South Carolina's governor informing him that the United States was going to resupply the fort, but he promised not to bring any more troops or arms or ammunition unless he was fired upon. So the governor of South Carolina sent word to President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy, and basically Lincoln left the ball in the Southerners' court. Lincoln said he was going to supply the fort, and he wouldn't fire first. Well, Jefferson Davis on April 12, 1861, ordered their forces to attack before the supplies could arrive. The soldiers in the fort held out for 33 hours, about a day and a half, 2 days. And what was amazing, there were thousands of shots fired, and not one single person died in this battle. There were injuries, but not one single person died. Well, they ran out of supplies, and their situation was hopeless. So eventually the United States Army soldiers holding the fort had to surrender. So once the shooting started, Lincoln called for 75,000 troops. And after the shooting started, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee voted to join the Confederacy. So we had the United States of America in the north versus the Confederate States of America in the south, and the Civil War had begun. Now we're going to have a couple of notebooks for this lesson. The first one's called Lincoln Quotes, and I have a quote here. It says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided." Now, whose philosophy was... Now, Lincoln's philosophy is we can't remain half slave and half free. My question is, whose philosophy was the opposite of Lincoln's in the quote above? And that was Stephen A. Douglas. He said we could remain half slave and half free as our forefathers made it. Here's another quote. "Physically speaking, we cannot separate. We cannot remove our respective sections from each other, nor build an impassable wall between them. A husband and wife may be divorced and go out of the presence and beyond the reach of each other, but the different parts of our country cannot do this. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war." Another quote from Lincoln, trying to make the Southerners see reason. So in the above quote, Abraham Lincoln uses what analogy to show that American can't split, and that is the divorce of a husband and wife. All right, I want you guys to make up your own quote as if you were president in 1860. The two issues are slavery and the breakup of the Union. What would you say to save the country? Then answer these two questions. According to the June 17, 1858 quote, what was Lincoln's expected outcome? Prove it using the quote. So you're going to use this quote right here for that. And then what is the March 4th, 1861 quote about? This quote right here. Prove it using the quote. Hint, it's a vocab word. All right. And I have one more notebook that I'd like you guys to do. I want you to do a Google search to find the seceding states and the dates they left. Draw a line from the state to the appropriate date under the map. Make a list ranking the states in order they withdrew from the Union, as shown in the example. Make sure and include the dates. So what you're going to do is you guys are going to draw lines to all these dates, all these states right here. And you're going to put a date that they left. And then on top of that, you're going to list them all in order right here. and you're going to put the name of the state and the date that it left. So you're going to do it two different ways. I want you to color the southern states all the same color, and I want you to color the northern states a different color, and make sure and color the territories over here a third color. Then draw a line dividing and separate the north and the south like I did with this red line right here. On this side, I want you to draw a picture for this timeline for each one of these events. Draw a picture or find a picture online and print it out that goes with this event. And then the writing. The Civil War officially began when Fort Sumter was attacked on April 12, 1861. The next day, Lincoln called for 75,000 troops. Imagine you are living in the Union, but you have a relative living in the Confederacy. Write a letter to your relative telling how you feel about the war and the prospect of fighting against each other. So pretend you have a relative on the opposite side, either north or south, and write a letter to them talking about the war. Well, that's the lesson today, kids. Have a great day and finish your notebooks.